So I'd like to welcome Joy Lynn to the stage, who will introduce our speaker, Alisa Barba. So Joy.
Okay, thanks Stephanie and your team for bringing us all together. I love the discussion that we've been having so far. I think the whole concept of civic on-ramps is really important. Democracies and news organizations, community organizations play such an important role in bringing people along in understanding they just don't live in a place with neighbors. They live in a place where they have a vested interest in taking care of each other. So I make it a point to attend the Collaborative Journalism Summit every year, and it's been wonderful to see the momentum that has grown around collaboration thanks to the collective work of many folks in this room and, of course, the leadership of the Center for Cooperative Media. My name is Joy Lynn. I work at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and as the steward of the federal appropriation for public media, CPB supports more than 1,500 locally owned and operated public television and radio stations whose signals reach 99% of the U.S. population, ensuring that nearly everyone living in America has free access to high quality and diverse content in front of a paywall that educates, informs, and strengthens civil society. Public media represents the largest nonprofit news system in the U.S. with over 4,000 journalists based at local stations. Over the past 15 years, CPB has helped sustain this ecosystem by investing more than $150 million in discretionary funds to journalism, and $44 million of that has gone towards supporting over 40 local and regional news collaborations, connecting 150 public media stations in 43 states in the District of Columbia, fostering a vibrant network of local and regional newsrooms with national reach. It's my pleasure to introduce America Amplified, an engaged journalism initiative that CPB has been proud to support beginning in 2019, when a group of public radio stations approached us with a collaborative proposal to strengthen local election coverage. And fast forward to the recent midterm elections, America Amplified's central team worked with television and radio stations in 25 states to equip the public with information on the voting process, on the air, on digital platforms, in places where people gathered. Stations asked what people didn't understand or wanted to know about elections and provided them the information they needed. And as you'll hear from Alisa shortly, ambitious plans are underway for 2024. And as we approach the 250th anniversary of America's independence, democratic values and systems, as we've discussed here, are being challenged. And public media newsrooms, which are among the most trusted and well-known institutions at the local level, are ideally situated to strengthen a shared understanding of the facts in their communities, facts that are critical to facilitating civil dialogue among people with divergent political viewpoints. And in an era of digital polarization, active disinformation efforts, and historic levels of distrust in institutions, we believe that America Amplified plays an important role in helping ensure that the public has the necessary information to fully uphold and participate in free and fair elections. And I'd like to now bring in the leader of the effort, Alisa Barba, Managing Editor of America Amplified.
Thanks, Joy, and hi, everybody. I'm really excited to share with you what we've been doing at America Amplified. But first, I want to say, give it up for Philly. Man, with Resolve, Philly, woo! And every voice, every vote. I spoke to the folks at Resolve Philly earlier and said, you guys are just like a Petri dish for experimentation. I love what they're doing. And if we were to realize what our ambitions are for America Amplified, we'd love to see this replicated in every community across the United States. But we'll get there slowly but surely. So America Amplified for 2024, where our host station is WFYI. When we're working through CPB, we have to have a host station that we work through. So WFYI in Indianapolis is our host station. So our ambition is to work with public media stations across the country in 2023 and 2024 to engage audiences and communities about the election and the voting process. And now what does this mean for you guys? Because most of you are not involved in public media. The key to this is going to be partnerships with other news organizations and with community groups, just like we heard about in this last project. So please reach out to me at the end of this or at some point in the next few months and ask how you can be involved, because we want you to be involved. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history. Well, this is the community engagement cycle that I think many people have been talking about. Identify the gaps in your coverage, who you're not talking to, report on those stories, report with those communities, and then re-engage. It's all about building trust and building relationships and reporting with your communities instead of on your communities, right? So that's kind of a basic premise that America Amplified is about community engagement journalism in public media. So we also created a community engagement playbook that you can find on americaamplified.org with, if people in your newsroom don't really know what community engagement is, haven't engaged in that process, there's a lot of resources there that you can look at. It's divided into different categories if you're a newsroom leader, if you're a reporter or producer, if you're the CEO of a newsroom. So please check that out. So 2019, 2020, we were, as Joy mentioned, we were working with large collaborations within the public media landscape to try to better understand where the America electorate was in the lead up to the 2020 election, to engage and understand those communities. Then we had the pandemic. A lot of our plans were upended, as were yours, but we ended up learning a lot about virtual engagement, I think, as many of you did. And then in 2021 and 2022, we worked with a bunch of small and medium-sized stations across the country who had their own different strategies on how to engage audiences. So we employed a lot of different methods. Just a few examples here. Texting clubs from every beat reporter at WITF in Pennsylvania, a storytelling workshop in Asheville, North Carolina. In Maine, they have a nightly news broadcast in a number of different languages to reach immigrant communities. And then, of course, some Spanish language experimentation at a small station in northern Illinois. These are just a few examples of some of the things we did in 2021 and what stations did with our support. And then we got to the midterms. There's all this anxiety about the state of democracy. And with the support of CPB, we launched a midterm election project, again, to try to make sure that audiences and communities had the information they needed to participate in the election. So we expanded the number of stations we were working with, 25 states, 30 stations in all. I'm moving quickly through this because I think we've talked about a lot of this over the course of today. We provided all of these stations with a Hearken embed, something that they can put on their websites and they can use on social media, basically saying, what questions do you have about participating in the midterm elections? We were looking for questions about the mechanics of voting. Where can I vote? How do I apply for an absentee ballot? How do I find out if my ballot has been received? I just moved recently. What do I do? And we received over 600 questions and answered those. The back end of this, and this is kind of where a massive 25-station, 30-station collaboration works. This is the back end of the Hearken EMS, Engagement Management System. So questions would come into us, we'd get a Slack alert that a question had come into New Hampshire Public Radio. We could view it on this platform, we could research the answer, check it with an editorial lead at that station, and then send it directly back to the questioner. We also had Spanish language embeds, and we had a text integration as well, so people could text their questions in. A lot of our work at America Amplified was helping stations get the word out that stations were answering questions. We did a lot of social media stuff, and stations got very creative. So KJZZ in Phoenix, for instance, printed out postcards and posters and put them up at community colleges all across the city and got tons of questions that way. At Michigan Public Radio, they had a TikTok and Instagram series where the county clerk would come in and answer the questions in person. Very popular. We also created FAQs for stations to publish online and to do little broadcast bits about this, and social media assets as well to share with them. So similar to what every voice, every vote was saying in terms of sharing these assets and sharing this co-branding along the line, because many of these stations have very little bandwidth to do this kind of stuff themselves, so we're trying to increase capacity and give them the tools to do this. So 2024 is already here, it seems like, and we are launching a new initiative where this time we hope to reach audiences in all 50 states. We have a staff of 3 right now, so how we'll do this, we don't know. It's going to have to get bigger. Again, as everybody says, we're trying to get beyond the political horse race, recognizing the polarization in the country and the lack of trust in media. So we are really focusing on engaged elections coverage for our stations. So not only does it help to build trust, but also it really has been proven to go a long way to bring viewers and listeners and readers to your websites. We saw a lot of our stations saw their metrics go way up when they had these kinds of articles on their website and when they did this kind of thing online. So it was really very popular among the stations that we worked with last year. So this time we're starting really early. For the midterm election project, we started maybe May or June before the midterms, and we were able to supply the stations with these tools and these strategies, but it was a scramble. As we all know, newsrooms tend to not focus on the election until like mid-October. This time we're starting as early as we can to focus on a community that you want to reach, map out the stakeholders, who are the important people there, form partnerships with people like you, with newsrooms like the ones you represent, do the call-outs, and distribute that call-outs among the partnerships that you've created, as well as your own website and on air. Gather and answer the questions, and then distribute the FAQs, and then rinse and repeat. Do it again. This is what we're going to be offering stations: intensive training, ongoing mentoring, access to the Harken Embed, funds for a bunch of engagement activities, social media assets, impact tracking, and access to a public media election information app. I'll talk a little bit about all of these. I'm really going fast. I hope I'm not going too fast. So intensive training, we're going to start off with a 6-session boot camp. If any of you participated in Election SOS last year, it was a really, really intensive training from a group of organizations. This is going to be an abbreviated sense of that, but the idea is to get newsrooms, we're hoping for one newsroom manager and at least one reporter producer, to get them on the same page for thinking about what their political coverage would be. The idea is to center community in your coverage rather than the politicians, and then how to do that. As we did in 2021 and 2022, if we're going to be working with 50 stations potentially, we're going to have to divide them into cohorts. And we're going to divide them into cohorts on a number of different levels. It may be the size of the station and the bandwidth that they have to do this kind of thing. It may be what audience are they targeting. Are they targeting a Spanish language speaking audience? Are they targeting rural audiences? It may be based on the level of experience they have with these kinds of engagement strategies. And we will have a trainer working with each of these cohorts, working with stations individually and then bringing them together in a group at least once a month to kind of share best practices, do more learning, and learn from each other. So that will be over the course of 2024. Again, we'll be sharing with them a Harken embed. Everybody knows what Harken is, right? Good idea, okay. I think early in the election year, they will be able to use this Harken embed to learn more about the communities that they're trying to reach. And then as we get closer to the election, we will have a uniform prompt, probably along the lines of what questions do you have about participating in the upcoming election. Last year in the midterm project, we wanted to capture questions about the mechanics of voting. But over half of the questions that came in, predictably enough, were about candidates and issues and judges. So we're going to be really working very hard behind the scenes to have answers to as many of those questions as we possibly can across all 50 states. We have an engagement fund where we will be able to help stations pay for translations, pay for in-person activities, pay for additional staff time, texting services. It will be, a case-by-case basis. What do you need? What can we help you with? We will have a social media strategy and a calendar. Again, I was inspired by Every Voice, Every Vote about how they did this with a branding kit as well as with social media influencers. The degree to which we can bring people in like that in every community and really get the word out there will be fantastic. What has worked for us in the past, and I think will be in play once again, is kind of tiers of engagement. For the most basic level, you're going to post it on your website and you're going to put it on social. And then on the second level, maybe you're going to do on-air, promotions. You're going to be amplifying it wherever you can. And then on the third level, you're going to be going out and tabling, holding live in-person events. You're going to be doing whatever you can to get the work out. Stations, public media stations, have all different levels of capacity, ranging from a three-person newsroom to WNYC or KPCC in LA, where there's huge. So we kind of have to customize it depending upon station capacity. And that's, again, where partners come in. We're using some AI, frankly, to develop a public media election information portal. Isn't that a great name? Where these questions will automatically come into this portal from the Harkin embeds from across the country, and we will have scraped basic election information from Secretary of State's websites for the most part. We will be editing the answers. Real humans will be looking at them. But we're hoping that this will create an easier and more efficient way of getting at some of the really basic questions that we know will come in from across the country. In this, on the left, you can see kind of where the information is pulled. We see the original source, and then we can edit it directly into that database and into that app. And then the answers will go back to the stations will approve them, and then they'll go to the questioner, and then we will be able to create FAQs out of these. Finally, we will be developing an impact tracking system. I think we talked about this in some of the earlier sessions. We'll be creating just the simplest Google metrics, Google Analytics that stations will be training them how to track this kind of stuff. And we'll also be bringing in some qualitative tracking as well. First of all, what outcome did you want to achieve? Did you get there? Why or why not? As many qualitative impacts that we can possibly track. All of this to convince station management, convince journalists, convince funders that this kind of human engagement in the news process, is the way we need to go and creates the kind of political coverage that really meets communities' information needs. We have 26 minutes left for questions if you have any. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Hi, how are you? I would love to hear a little bit more about your strategy for rural communities. If most of the questions that you get are about the candidates, one of the things we find in small races, particularly anything with fewer than 7,000 eligible voters, is that that information is just not available online often, just literally not there. Even the registrars aren't posting in a timely way. How do you deal with that, and how do you work with, and these are the newsrooms with the least capacity to do the groundwork.
Yeah,
how do you work on that? LA and New York, frankly,
no problem.
They're all right.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. No, I agree with you. Though people in LA and New York still have questions about the judges, for instance. That's one thing that we found across the country is that people were saying, how do I judge the judges? And so that's one thing we'll be looking at. I don't have a really good answer to that question. I think that what we will do is reach out to small rural newsrooms like yours, hoping that you will be finding some of those answers. We will have a team of researchers as well that will be digging into this stuff, and it may be a lot of phone calls, a lot of research, and frankly, there will be some questions that we won't be able to answer. Especially if we're trying to do a nationwide project like this.
I did want to jump in, though. We were just talking about this earlier. I attended a gathering earlier today of rural public media stations, and one of them was a station serving I told you, it was New Mexico, but the rural part of New Mexico, Las Cruces.
Yeah. Down on the border.
And they actually benefit hugely from the New Mexico collaboration. That station, the general manager said they just had one reporter. But that service is so vital. I mean, there are parts of the state where, their only actually content service is public television and public radio. No other signals reach them. And in that case, the station actually has recognized the tremendous service that they need to provide. He was saying that in the most recent elections, they actually had like 25 candidate forums, because this would be one of the few opportunities that the community would have in engaging the audience. So, I mean, you can think, I think what's amazing is there's so many people here that have information to provide, and there are stations that are serving communities that really need that information. So I actually can't encourage you enough to consider a partnership where it makes sense with a public media station because of the reach that they do have to underserved communities.
And I just want to give a shout out to KRWG, because it's a cool station, and they need capacity, so please directly fund them.
Yay!
Hi, I'm Danny Stusser with The Jolt, which is the Journal of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater. We operate in the shadow of two public radio stations, and we've learned that public radio is a buzzword that excludes community media, which is another buzzword, which defines three kinds of television: public access, education, and government. Does your program include the PEG stations, public education and government?
I think Joy can address that as well. What we want to do is cast as wide a net as possible with partnerships. I think we would probably end up working with one of the two public media stations in your community. But
Then you just go right over us. Nobody cares about our county.
What I'm saying is that we would like to have them create partnerships with you. We would encourage them to reach out to you all to work with you.
Let's talk afterwards. Our experience is that our community is too small for them to spend very much time with at all. When I say very much time, I mean once a year.
What do they do once a year?
They might pay attention to something going on in our county. There's a problem. There's rural and there's urban, but I don't know how big it is, but there are a lot of cities that surround big markets that are ignored by public television, by public radio, and certainly by the newspapers. And we're here trying to figure out how to fix this.
I think you raise a really important point, right? Like, public broadcasting reaches 99% of Americans, but their ability to serve is limited because they too have limited resources, and that's why CPB has been so invested in collaborative resources. I will say, though, that I emphasize when I talk about public media as an ecosystem that each station is independently owned and operated. And actually, even though it can be frustrating at times, it actually makes public media stations more tethered to their local community in a way that nationalized media outlets can easily, as you've seen with the financial constraints, really make them overemphasize national coverage. And so I do hold out that belief that stations that adhere to their mission and recognize their service would welcome the ability to partner, but I just can't speak on behalf of them. CPB is an editorial firewall, but between the appropriations process and what content makers make. But I think that it's worth having a conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. It was a great question.
Hi, my name is Rashad Mahmoud from the New Mexico Local News Fund. That's a funny coincidence. Diana, the project coordinator for that collaborative that you mentioned, is here too, so that's great. Joy, thanks for the shout out. And relatedly, my question was going to be, obviously, the public media stations that I'm familiar with are so grateful whenever there's an initiative like this that comes down the pike and that provides them more resources to do something. But obviously, especially for the smaller stations like KUNM, KRWG that we work with, like ongoing sustainable resources is the real challenge. And so I just wonder how you guys think about it. Like, obviously you did 2022, you're going to do 2024. Is it possible to make some sort of ongoing regular commitment so that participating stations will know that they have these resources coming down the road, or not?
Well, I mean, so going back to the, public media in the U.S. was designed as a public-private partnership.
Yeah.
And so actually, when you look at the way the appropriations is distributed, we're getting super into just like the act, but 70% of it actually goes directly to stations in the form of unrestricted funding. And so in that way, they do have a consistent flow of funds. You raise a really interesting, really important challenge that I think is really not discussed enough. We talk a lot about news deserts, but the overlay on rural communities is quite significant. And actually, I'm not the first-hand source for this because I heard it at the session this morning. But I will say that a person of authority said that for every taxpayer dollar, a public radio station can usually raise about $8. But for rural stations, it's actually only like $2.50. And that's because, it's directly correlated with the populations they serve.
Yeah.
And so especially in rural communities, right, like public media stations have some resources that other content makers don't have. And we are always trying to encourage some real thoughtfulness around what efficiencies can be achieved through collaborations, and where public media stations can also offer opportunities to scale. And it's a different solution in every part of the country. But I think that the way you talk about the challenge of serving information needs in rural communities is something that public media stations are very well aware of, that we're very well aware of, and we're trying to figure out together. So we should discuss more.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Stoll with the San Francisco Public Press. We're a 14-year-old independent nonprofit. Started on the web, launched a print edition, suspended the print edition during the pandemic, but also started up a low-power FM radio station. Part of the LPFM program is a couple of hundred stations around the country that the FCC has licensed in blank spots in the spectrum. I'm wondering if you have worked with LPFMs, if you'd consider it, and thereby also working with other organizations based in the communities that have been doing journalism and using that to do creative things with audio.
My approach is that we want to encourage the stations that we work with to work with whomever in their community is reaching the audiences that they want to reach. So I would say absolutely yes, if that is an option in their community. We would not discourage any kind of partnerships, I think, with those kinds of organizations that are providing information to their communities. So I would say yes. I don't know if there's a reason to say no.
No, I mean, no, I'm talking about information needs. I think, right, there's a difference between community service grant qualified stations and, any news organization that would want to try and partner with a public media station involved in this effort.
Okay, so that's the NPR member station. Is that the only? Is that the qualification?
We have like a bunch of qualifications for stations that qualify for community service grants. There's a whole process for it. Yeah, I'm not the authority on that, but I could direct you to where those qualifications exist.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian with Piece by Piece Strategies. I saw sort of it more towards the beginning of the presentation, you talked about connecting newsrooms through different cohorts depending on like what they're reporting on. I'm curious if y'all did that in 2022 or if there were any sort of emerging trends or emerging needs that you started to realize sort of exist beyond the immediate funding needs of some of these local organizations and newsrooms.
Do you mean, were there audiences or communities that needed the information that we recognize across the country, that kind of thing?
Yeah, or I think like particular trends with connecting organizations that might be reporting with rural communities, or in particular, I think you also mentioned language, right? Are there particular gaps or particular needs, either internal in, some of the affiliates, or sort of external in the audience, that you think is really important, particularly as we move into 2024, to be aware of, or to start thinking about how to fill some of those gaps?
There's a lot of, I would say, interest on the part of many public media stations on reaching Spanish-speaking audiences or audiences of Latino descent. That's a huge group of people. But there seems to be a lot of communities where there's low voter turnout that happen to be predominantly Spanish-speaking. So a sense that there's a lot of information that needs to get out to those communities for sure. I did notice that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I think the basic message is that this project is very interested in working with a wide breadth of organizations across the country. So if there is a public media station that you know of that is in your area, it might be a very good time to be part of this project and to be able to, tap into some of these resources. The mission is to make sure that our communities and our audiences have the information they need to participate in the election and to increase civic engagement across the country. So we're doing what we can.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Alisa.